Hello, and thanks for joining us today as we continue our study in the Song of Solomon. In our last lesson, we were talking about how love was tested, as we find the Shulamite has had a voiced affection for her shepherd boy, but King Solomon is trying as much as he can to woo her attentions over to him and to forsake the love that she has for her beloved shepherd boy. As we've noticed in past lessons, they left the countryside setting. They now made their triumphal entry into Jerusalem, and the general population adored her beauty. They marveled at the parade as they arrived in town, and now this girl finds herself in a whole new environment that would indeed have been very overwhelming, to put it mildly. And so it is here that Solomon is able to show off all of the fame that he has, the possessions that he has. What an exalted opportunity is laid before this girl if she would be willing to turn her affections over to him. And so the girl is tormented. She has dreams that helps her to understand the importance of holding on to her lover, that while she was out touring the town, evil befell her, that things in the city are not safe and secure for her. She doesn't feel at home there. And so, as we noticed last time in our study, in what I call part 3 of this unfolding poem, going to scene 2, which is actually found in the 5th chapter of the book of the Song of Solomon, that she starts it out by dreaming that she was at home and her lover visits her, or maybe even she's dreaming that he comes to see her in Jerusalem. And she talks about how beautiful he is, how much she loves him. And in verse 9 of the 5th chapter, we find here the chorus of ladies making a comment back to her. What the Amplified Version says, "Why is your beloved more than another beloved? You, O fairest among women," taunted the ladies, "what is your beloved more than another beloved, that you should give us such a charge?" She would tell them, if you see him, I am sick with love. I am only fascinated with him. And they didn't seem to understand this. After all, Solomon has a whole harem of women as his wives. And so why is she so hung up on this one guy? And she goes on then in the next several verses to describe her beloved and how handsome he is, how wonderful he is in every way. And so for the next 6 verses or so, the Shulamite is talking about the virtues of her shepherd boy and the many ways in which she loved to be with him. And so when we get to the 6th chapter in the very first verse, it says, "Where has your beloved gone, O you fairest among women?" And again, the ladies showed their interest in the remarkable person whom the Shulamite had championed with such unstinted praise. They too wanted to know him. They insisted, "Where is your beloved hiding himself? For we would seek him with you." And so the ladies here that are talking to the Shulamite woman are amazed at the story she has told about him. And they would like to meet him. They would like to see him. This kind of love transcends anything that they've been associated with. This is a different kind of love. It seems to be a deeper love. It is not fickle. It doesn't kind of get itself turned on and then turned off. And so they want to know more about this particular man that the Shulamite seems to be so absolutely in love with. And so in the common English version, it says in verses 2 and 3 of the 6th chapter of the Song of Solomon, "My lover has gone down to his garden, to the fragrant plantings, to graze in the gardens, and to gather the lilies. I belong to my lover, and my lover belongs to me, the one grazing among the lilies." In other words, she is saying, he's right here in my heart. And I'm thinking about him and what he's doing, and I'm sure that he is thinking about me. Well, last week we talked about the questions that were given relative to this particular point in our study. And so today we move into what's going to turn out to be scene 3 of the unfolding of this adventure. And this is Solomon's second effort to win the love of the Shulamite girl now that they are at the palace and they are now in this wonderful setting where he can show his power and his influence. And we find him here looking at Song of Solomon at chapter 6 and beginning in verse 4. He said, "You are as beautiful as Tisra, the capital of the northern kingdom's first king, my love, and as comely as Jerusalem. But you are as terrible as the bannered host. Oh, turn away your flashing eyes from me, for they overcome me. Your hair is like a flock of goats trailing down from Mount Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of ewes coming from their washing, of which all are in pairs, and not one of them is missing. Your cheeks are like the halves of pomegranates behind your veil. There are 60 queens and 80 concubines and virgins without number. But my dove, my undefiled and perfect one, stands alone above them all. She is the only one of her mother. She is the choice one of her who bore her. The daughters saw her and called her blessed and happy. Yes, the queens and the concubines, and they praised her." So we find from the Amplified Version here that Solomon is giving, once again, heaping praise to this beautiful Shulamite girl and how perfect she is. He talks about her beauty and the way in which he is just captivated by her. And he uses many imageries, even from the countryside. A flock of freshly washed sheep or goats, that she is perfectly proportioned in every way, and that even among the queens and concubines that he has already at the palace, she stands alone. She is above them all. And he says, "You are just so undefiled, that you are the perfect one. You are the only child of your daughter, and she did a perfect job in raising you and teaching you how to carry yourself." And so the point that he makes here is that as you came in, even to the presence of everyone here in Jerusalem, you won their hearts. The queens and the concubines all adore you. They have no animosity or jealousy towards you, because they can understand why I love you so much, why I see you as being so fantastic, because you're just perfect in every way. So the flattery here that Solomon heaps upon this young girl is just kind of hard to fathom. It certainly is the kind of information that you would think would turn a girl's head and get her to listen closely and turn her attentions to a man who seems to think she is just so perfect in every way. And in verse 10, we find the ladies of the court saying, "Who is she that looketh forth as the morning, fair as the moon, clear as the sun, and terrible as an army with banners?" In other words, the point that they make is, we want to get you to know you better. Who is this person who is just so wondrous? Such wonder in so many ways is just amazing to us. And so we're anxious to get to know and to also share in the favors of this wonderful woman that Solomon has introduced into the court. And so we find here that the Shulamite then begins to kind of give a little answer about herself. "I went down into the garden of nuts to see the fruits of the valley, and to see whether the vine flourished and the pomegranates budded, or ever I was aware my soul made me like the chariots of Aminadab." In other words, she begins to explain to the ladies of the court how it was that she actually came in contact with Solomon. That why it is that she is here. He just saw me while I was out. In the Amplified Version, in verse 11 of the 6th chapter, it says, "The Shulamite replied, I went down into the nut orchard one day to look at the green plants of the valley, to see whether the grapevine had budded with the pomegranates that were in flower. And before I was aware of what was happening, my desire to roam about had brought me into the area of the princes of my people," or the king's entourage, the king's retinue of people that were there. And so that's how our paths crossed. It was not that I went trying to appeal to Solomon. I did not come there trying to catch his eye and win his affection. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, so to speak. And people saw me and my beauty and carried me to Solomon, and now I'm in Jerusalem. And going down to verse 13, We find here the Shulamite saying, "Return, return, O Shulamite. Return, return, that we may look upon thee." What will we see in the Shulamite? As it were, the company of two armies. As we find in another version, talking here in verse 13, she says, "I began to flee, but they called to me, Return, return, O Shulamite. Return, return, that we may look upon you. I replied, What is there for you to see in the poor little Shulamite? And they answered, As upon a dance before two armies, or a dance of Menahem." In other words, she said, you are the center of attention. This is what the ladies are saying. And even though you may be kind of overcome with all of this, you would like to flee away from this, that you don't like our questions about you and our efforts to get to know you better, don't go. Stay here with us and let's try to get better acquainted. You are somebody super, super special. And she says, why are you so curious about me? And they said, well, you're like the one who's dancing before armies go to war. You're just captivated. You can draw our attention away from the tension of the moment, and all we can see is you. And we just want more to know about you. And so the ladies in chapter 7 begin to add their flattery to this young girl, what they see in her. Beginning in verse 1 of Song of Solomon, chapter 7 and verse 1. Then her companions began noticing and commenting on the attractiveness of her person. How beautiful are your feet and sandals, O queenly maiden. Your rounded limbs are like jeweled chains, the work of a master's hand. Your body is like a rounded goblet in which no mixed wine is wanting. Your abdomen is like a heap of wheat set about with lilies. Your two breasts are like two fawns, the twins of a gazelle. Your neck is like the tower of ivory. Your eyes are like the pools of Heshbon by the gate Bath-rabbim. Your nose is like the tower of Lebanon, which looks toward Damascus. Your head crowns you like Mount Carmel, and the hair of your head like purple. Then, seeing the king watching the girl in absorbed admiration, the speakers add, the king is held captive by thy tresses. So what we see here is in these first 5 verses of the 7th chapter, they echo some of the same imagery that King Solomon has used to describe this perfectly proportioned young girl. She is perfect in every way. They use many sorts of metaphors and comparisons to say you're like this, or similes that you're like that, and everything is perfection. Everything is captivating. And so here we find that this Shulamite woman now is listening to the approval being given to her by all of the ladies of the court. And she has heard some of the same overtures, I'm sure, even from the people on the street as they cheered for her as they were coming into town. Solomon has talked to her not once, but more than once, talking about her beauty, how much he loves her, how perfect she is in every way. The world is at her feet if she simply wants to take it. And all of this flattery is being given unto her. All this admiration is hers. And as the ladies mention here, Solomon seems to be watching from afar and kind of appreciating the fact that he's not the only one to chime into her beauty and to talk about how gorgeous she is. And so he has something else to say, beginning in verse 6 of this 7th chapter. How fair and how pleasant art thou, O love, for delights! This thy stature is like to a palm tree, and thy breast to clusters of grapes. I said, I will go up to the palm tree. I will take hold of the boughs thereof. Now also thy breast shall be as clusters of the vine, and the smell of thy nose as apples, and the roof of thy mouth like the best wine for my beloved that goeth down sweetly, causing the lips of those who are asleep to speak. What we find here is that in the opening of, all the way down to the opening of verse 9, we're seeing here the comments made by Solomon as he is talking here about her beauty and what he sees. Looking at the Amplified Version, in verse 6 it says, the king came forward, saying, how fair and how pleasant you are, O love, with your delights. Your stature is like that of a palm tree, and your bosom is like the cluster of dates, declared the king. I resolve that I will climb the palm tree. I will grasp its branches. Let your breasts be like clusters of the grapevine, and the scent of your breath like apples, and your kisses like the best wine. And it's then at this point that the Shulamite woman interrupts him. And what we see happening here in the next couple of verses is climactic to all of this that has been said. Solomon is pressing his case. The ladies of the court are pressing their case. The crowd has admired her. The queens and concubines and others of the court have said nice things and flattering things to her. This girl is kind of under the microscope, and the pressure is on for her to give in and say, okay, I love you, this is a wonderful arrangement, and let's have a happy life together. But let's look how the Amplified Version splits this up in verse 9. The king has just said, your kisses are like the best wine, but then the Shulamite interrupted. That goes down smoothly and sweetly, for my beloved. The shepherd, the kisses, gliding over his lips while he sleeps. And she proudly said, I am my beloved's, and his desire is toward me. Right here we have it. The king's there. The ladies of the court are there. All this flattery has come her way. But now she summons up the courage, for the first time in the unfolding of this poem, to actually declare her love for the shepherd boy and to somewhat put Solomon in his place. Because whenever he's talking about the love that he has, and he's just going on and on and on, she talks about the roof of thy mouth is like the best wine, and she interrupts and says, for my beloved, that goeth down sweetly, causing the lips of those that are asleep to speak. I am my beloved's, and his desire is toward me. Are you catching the point? Solomon, I don't love you. My love is for the shepherd boy. All of this is grand. You have been very kind. I am here in this wonderful situation, all because of you. And she does not want to seem unappreciative of all of the attention she has received. But she is now ready to inform the king that her heart is somewhere else. I love my beloved, and beyond that, my beloved loves me. And in verse 10 in the Amplified Version, she said, come, my beloved, let us go forth into the field. Let us lodge in the villages. Let us go out early in the vineyards and see whether the vineyards of the vines have budded, whether the grape blossoms have opened, and whether the pomegranates are in bloom. And there I will give you my love. The point that she is making is that her heart is set on the special moments that she wants to have with her beloved. Continuing on in verse 13, she said, the mandrakes give a smell, and at our gate there are all manners of pleasant fruits, new and old, which I have laid up for thee, O my beloved. O thou wert as my brother, that sucked the breasts of my mother, and when I should find thee without, I would kiss thee, yea, I would not be despised. The point that she's making here is that my love is laid up for my shepherd boy. As we end up the 7th chapter in the Amplified Version in verse 13, it says, the mandrakes give forth fragrance, and over our doors are all manner of choice fruits, new and old, which I have laid up for you, O my beloved. So her heart is set on having more time with her beloved. She's looking forward to a time that she can be reunited with him. Solomon, I'm sorry, but you're not it. My love is for the shepherd boy, and not only does she declare that love, but she also reveals some of the longing that is within her to be back with him. Here in the 8th chapter, in the first few verses, looking forward to the shepherd's arrival, the eager girl pictures their meeting. And so here's what she's hoping. I'm going to get to go home. I'm going to get to be with my beloved. And this is what I'm imagining he's going to say whenever we get back together. Oh, that you were like my brother, who nursed from the breasts of my mother. If I should find you without, I would kiss you, yes, and none would despise me for it. I would lead you and bring you into the house of my mother, who would instruct me. I would cause you to drink spiced wine, and of the juice of my pomegranates. Then musingly she added, oh, that his left hand were under my head, and his right hand embraced me. So here she is making the case to her beloved, about her beloved shepherd boy, to Solomon and to the ladies of the court. And basically, she is saying it in no uncertain terms that I want to go home. I want to be in my familiar surroundings, at my mother's house, the one who has instructed me and guided me all through my life. We'll be able to enjoy the simple pleasures that are there, the spiced wine of the juice of my pomegranates, that you would be able to embrace me and that we would be able to once again be together. She's made her case. She's made her choice back in verse 10 of the 7th chapter. And now she is letting Solomon and all the ladies of the court know that I want to go home. My love is elsewhere. And in verse 4 of the 8th chapter, she says, I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, that you stir not up, nor wake my love until he please. In other words, get out of my way. I want to go back and be with my beloved. That is where my heart is. That is where my affection is. And I want to be reunited with him. Now, we find that apparently this gets the point across. That apparently now Solomon realizes he loves her. He thinks she's absolutely beautiful. But even all of his flattery and all of the opportunity and all of the things he said and all of the acceptance from the court, all of these temptations have not turned her head. She still has that true, abiding love for her shepherd boy. And so, as we look to the ending here, moving into what happens in the closing scene of this, we are now going to see in part 4, I call it, of this poem kind of slash play, that now, as she is wound up in her last conversation in Jerusalem, telling the ladies of the court to kind of get out of my way, that I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, that you stir not up, nor awake my love until he please. I want to go home. As we see the ending here in these last few verses in the 8th chapter, we see her now having the chance to go back home. Her true love has been victorious. Solomon, in his wisdom, realizes he's not going to be able to win her heart. She is truly in love with somebody else. We notice all the way through here the strategy, that every time that Solomon has tried to make a pass at her or compliments were given to her, she didn't dwell on those things and let them turn her head. She'd built kind of a wall around her heart. She loved her beloved. And Solomon was not going to break over that wall. Neither was all of these other folks who were encouraging her to develop an affection and take advantage of a relationship with a king. I love my beloved, and he is the one that I want to be with. So as we get now to what might be looked at as scene 1 here of this final section of this poem, the shepherd boy and the Shulamite woman are now able to once again go back home. You can almost visualize the two of them as they're walking through the mountains, getting back to their home, getting back to familiar surroundings. We find here in verse 5, it says, Who is this that cometh up from the wilderness, leaning upon her beloved? I raised thee up under the apple tree, where thy mother brought thee forth. There she brought thee forth that bare thee. Set me as a seal upon thine heart, as a seal upon thine arm. For love is as strong as death. Jealousy is as cruel as the grave. The coals thereof are coals of fire, which hath a most vehement flame. We find that the Shulamite and her shepherd boy are now coming back home, and they're able to talk about all that's gone through their head while this trial has beset them. And the Shulamite girl is making it plain, I don't want to see this relationship messed up. We're back home, and this is the way it should be. There's a seal upon my heart. You are the one that I love. And notice what he says. He answers her back, talking a little bit more as it comes up in their conversation. The speakers are not clearly defined right here. But there is this point of his answering and saying that she is saying that love is as strong as death. It's an irresistible force. But he says jealousy is cruel as the grave. The coals thereof are coals of fire, which hath a most vehement flame. Vehement flame. Wow. He realizes here that he's had to deal with feelings of jealousy, maybe even anger, over the fact that Solomon snatched up his girl, and he's gone through a lot as a result of her being gone. He says in verse 7, many waters cannot quench love, neither can the floods drown it. If a man would give all the substance of his house for love, it would utterly be condemned. Well, here is the point that is being made in this whole scene. The climax came in chapter 7 and verse 10 with her declaration of her love for her shepherd boy. Now we are getting to their reuniting and some of the keys as to what helped them get through this great trial as they struggled with their problems, with the king's intrusion and the shepherd boy being left kind of in the dust, so to speak. She said that her love never wavered. She'd built that wall around her heart, and she was not going to give her heart to anybody else but to that shepherd boy. Love is as strong as death. I'm not going to turn loose of the relationship that we have. But the shepherd boy talked about the way in which the one left behind, as he had been, suffered to deal with the problem of jealousy. They were like coals of fire. It was like being in a violent flame. You're dealing with anger. You're dealing with unfulfilled passion. You are dealing with the jealousy and yea, even the hatred of somebody else who wants to intrude into that perfect relationship that you have invested so much of yourself into. And that fire is not easily quenched. You can't just say, well, I'll get over it, because it just keeps smoldering. Many waters can't quench love. That's the feeling that we have. That's the relationship that we have. Neither can the floods drown it. If a man would give all the substance of his house for love, it would utterly be condemned, or it was not going to accomplish anything. It's not going to be something that's going to be appreciated. It instead would be that wealth would be despised. It's not going to take the place of true love. Now, the shepherd and the Shulamite are back together. They have reaffirmed their love for each other, shared a little bit of the emotional trauma that they went through while they were separated. But now it appears as though they are getting together. The wedding is going to take place, and now wonderful times are ahead for them. And in the next few verses, basically winding up the episode here, we find that there's some kind of, this is right at the time of the wedding, it would seem, and there is some bantering between the Shulamite girl and her brothers as they tease and kind of ride her a little bit about her upcoming wedding. We have a little sister in verse 8. She hath no breasts. What shall we do for our sister in the day when she shall be spoken for? In other words, they're kind of teasing her that, well, you're not that pretty, and you're not that perfect, and you are, and they're trying to pick at her, talking about her being less than perfect. And in verse 9, another one of the brothers said, if she be a wall, we will build upon her a palace of silver, and if she be a door, we will enclose her with boards of cedar. In other words, we just need to lock her up. We just need to kind of lock her away, and she doesn't need to have this relationship with the shepherd boy. This doesn't need to go anywhere. Maybe this is all just needs to be passed over, and she doesn't even deserve this happiness. They're not being mean-spirited about it here. It can be said with a smile on the face, ways of teasing that, you've been to the court of the king, and now you're back, and so they've got to find a way to kind of put her in her place, shall we say, with the teasing that they give to her. But she is going to answer her brother's teasing. And she says, I am a wall, in verse 10, and my breasts like towers. Then was I in his eyes as one that found favor. Solomon had a vineyard at Baal-Hamon. He led out the vineyard unto keepers. Every one for the fruit thereof was to bring 1,000 pieces of silver. Said, you don't think I'm that pretty? You don't think I amount to much? Talk to King Solomon about that. King Solomon sure thought I was pretty. He talked about how beautiful I was. You said I had no breasts. Well, he said my breasts were like towers. And I was in his eyes as one that found favor, not someone to be laughed at. And I found favor in his sight. And out of all that he has, all the vineyards that he owns, and all the things that my king possesses, he wanted me. But she says in verse 12, my vineyard, which is mine, is before me. Thou, O Solomon, must have 1,000, and those that keep the fruit thereof 200. Thou that dwellest in the gardens, the companions hearken to thy voice. Cause me to hear it. Make haste, my beloved, and be thou like a roe to a young hart upon the mountains of spices. In other words, she says, I held it together. I kept my love. I was true to my love for my shepherd boy. There's other choices for King Solomon. There are other conquests that he might be able to acclaim on down through the years, but not me. I have a true love with the perfect one that my life is focused on. And so I just simply want to be with him. When I call out, I want him to answer. And make haste, my beloved. Let's go ahead and bring this marriage to a climax. Let us have our lives together. Let us live happily ever after. Now, there's a lot of lessons that we can go back and pick out of the Song of Solomon. And so for now, we'll stop here, having gone through these two scenes from this fourth part, looking at all the text of the Song of Solomon. But we'll talk a little bit more about some of the things that are taught to us in this passage and make sure we have a better understanding of the text when we get together next week. This is Dale Robbins from the Eubank Church of Christ. I appreciate so much you joining us today, and I hope that you'll join us again as we continue our study in the Song of Solomon.